Welcome back to another episode of the Always About People Show. My name is Chris Allen. I'm the host, and on this show, every episode, we talk about issues related to people. Most often, they're the things that we hear from the leaders that we're working with on a regular basis, the companies that we're in regular conversations with, the leaders that we are coaching. We take what they're wrestling with and we try to engage you guys in the conversation. So whether you're watching live on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, we're glad that you're here. Hope that you'll continue to join us for these important conversations. And just want to remind you, you can like, subscribe, sign up for notifications just so that you don't miss any of these episodes. Well, on today's show, we want to talk about this important topic, how to have difficult conversations with people. I think so often we hear from leaders that there's an issue. We're not having these difficult conversations. Oftentimes, people won't even admit to that. The truth is they just delay in having the conversations. And they can come up with all kinds of different excuses. You may be able to come up with all kinds of rationalizations as well for why you're not having the conversations you know you need to have. But the truth is, there's more behind it. So what we thought we would do on this show today is cover this idea of what are some really simple, practical steps that I can take to make sure that I'm having these difficult conversations. What I would say is that you're having these conversations, which if you just simply frame it, that no longer are they difficult, they're just crucial or they're critical. There's plenty of material out there, books by the same title. But what we want to help you understand are a few practical things. And our hope, like in most of these shows, is that you would just take one practical tip and that you would be able to use it in your leadership of people right now or this week or next week. And we hope that it helps you. So as we thought about this idea of how to have difficult conversations with people, I had two main categories as I thought about it. There's in the moment, what are the practical steps in the moment that I need to be aware of so that I can have effective, difficult conversations? And then there's what do I need to do on an ongoing basis to change the culture, to change my own leadership in having these difficult conversations? So let's start with just in the moment. And this is like the critical steps that I need to have in the moment to have these conversations. So I've got a few practical steps that I just wrote down. These are in no specific order. They're not prioritized. It's just a few thoughts to leave you with. The first thing that I would think about is don't delay. Don't delay. I think most leaders that we talk to delay difficult conversations because all of us delay difficult things. So it has nothing to do with conversations. It's just simply most of us look at a list of tasks and we will take the tasks that are easiest and save the most difficult ones for last. And what most often happens is that we get to the end of the day, we never got to the most difficult tasks, and therefore we just push them to the next day and the next day and the next day. So I think just one thing to be aware of is don't delay. Go ahead and engage in that difficult conversation. But before just entering into the conversation in the spur of the moment, take just a few moments to gather your thoughts, take some notes. But I would just encourage you, don't delay that difficult conversation. All right. A second thing, again, no particular order, is just build up the courage to do it. Be courageous. I think leadership takes courage. In order to make change, in order to engage with people, it takes courage. So be courageous. In that moment, you might have to walk yourself through. You may have to engage in some self-talk just to get yourself to a place where you have the courage to step into a difficult conversation. The next thing that I would leave you with is just be intentional. Be intentional. Another way to say this is, because it's the root word, is what is, or the question would be, what is your intent? And I think this question can frame the whole purpose of having difficult conversations. If your intent in the conversation is to make sure that you look good, if the intent is to make sure that your self-esteem is maintained, if the intent is to exert your leadership or your authority or to prove that somebody has missed something, if your intent is to be authoritarian, I would say that you probably need to pause. You need to rethink why you're having the conversation and reset the intent. And so this idea of being intentional would be, I am going to engage in this difficult conversation with people because I believe it is best for them and it is best for us or for me. And so therefore, the reason that I'm going to engage in this conversation, the reason that I'm going to not delay it, I'm going to have it now, the reason that I'm going to step into this with courage is because I actually believe that it is better for the person, because they will come out of this conversation better for having it, and it will be better for me. Most often, the intent of stepping into that conversation, if I go into that conversation believing, man, I want to have this conversation because I believe it's best for this person, that will change the way I communicate. That will change the way that I have the conversation. That will change the way that I speak and the words that I use. And I just believe that the outcome will be much better if I am intentional about why I'm having the conversation. What is my intent in this? Another thing, be really clear. Be really clear. Be clear about your intentions and your expectations in the conversation. And I would say have that up front. So immediately at the beginning of a difficult conversation, I think it's best to just say, listen, here's what I want out of this conversation. Here are a few things that I don't want to happen. I want to make sure that you understand how much I value you. You understand how much I care for you. I want both of us to be better for having this conversation, but there are a few things that need to change. And what I want to come out of this is that you would have more clarity, that you would understand how you can continue to improve and grow and develop and flourish and thrive. And that's my goal, and that's my intent. And if I can speak that up front at the beginning of a difficult conversation, it sets the table and the foundation for what's to come in that conversation. I think it also shows that on many levels, I, as the leader, am having this difficult conversation for a purpose. It's not to make you look bad. It's not to make you feel bad. It's not to make you understand how much of a failure you are. It's to actually improve, develop, encourage, and grow. And yet most of us grow through difficult times. All right, next, make it safe. Or another way to say it, just keep it safe. And what I'm speaking of there is this idea of psychological safety. And one way to keep it safe is to be vulnerable from the beginning. I think it's much easier for somebody to handle a difficult conversation if they know that it's difficult for me too. And so as a leader, I don't want anyone to think that a difficult conversation is easy for me. I want them to understand, hey, this is a difficult conversation for me to have with you. I've got all kinds of insecurities myself, but what I really want to do is make sure that I'm having this conversation for the betterment of both of us. And in that vulnerability, in that transparency, in that willingness to be truthful, we establish trust between the two parties. So I want to keep it safe. I want to make sure that the individual has the ability to respond and be vulnerable and be transparent with me too. I want to be willing to accept feedback from them. It's not just a one-way monologue. Would be a dialogue. So that would be the other thing, is make sure that you're thinking through this difficult conversation as a dialogue. And as a leader, be willing to accept where you have failed or where you need to be teachable or coachable or make some change. So part of being courageous and entering into this conversation is the reality that I could come out of this conversation with a few things that I need to improve to make myself better too. So one idea would be, even as you are clear about your intentions and expectations in the conversation, say, I'm willing to learn through this conversation as well, because I want to get better as a leader. I want to know how we could have avoided this going, or we could avoid this going forward. I want to know how I could have helped you better. What are some things that you need more from me? What do you need less from me? And we can go back and forth in that dialogue. And I want to make sure that we've created a safe enough place where that can happen. Next, I would just say be perceptive. Be really perceptive in the conversation. What I would say is listen, watch for posture, watch eyes, watch all nonverbals, capture tone of voice, capture humility, capture, again, any moments where you feel like the person feels failure. Use that as an opportunity to build them back up. And people have this unbelievable way of showing you how they're feeling through their eyes. And so I would say difficult conversations need to be done face to face. Obviously, much better when you're in the same room together. But in our kind of hybrid remote world that we live in today, at least doing it face to face on some sort of a virtual platform would be beneficial, so that you can actually see facial expressions and eyes as you communicate. So be perceptive, notice the little things, then you can address them. Because again, going back to your intent, be intentional. What's my intent? My intent is not to destroy a person. My intent is not to leave them weaker or feeling poor about themselves. My attempt is to build up their self-esteem by helping them understand how they can get better. So be perceptive. Next, believe the best. Believe the best. Believe the best in the person. I think oftentimes we think this person is going to be destroyed by this difficult conversation. And I would tell you that from experience, most people know ahead of time how they're doing and what you want to talk to them about. Most people are pretty perceptive and aware of their own performance, and in their own insecurity, they're not going to come and say, I'm a poor performer or I need to improve. They're looking for feedback on how to improve. And so while I might know, gosh, my performance has lacked in the last few days, or there's some things that are affecting my performance, or there's some things that, quite honestly, I just don't know how to do, and I'm looking for some clarity. And so most people are aware of what's going on. And so when you even set up a conversation with somebody, they're coming in with a level of understanding on what you're going to talk about. Many times they've made up their own stories in their head about what you want to talk about. Sometimes the story they've made up in their head is even worse than what you want to address. And so I think just understand that believing the best in people will ultimately lead to a great outcome. I think in most conversations, people are waiting for us to have the difficult conversation with them. They don't feel great about their performance or their role or what they're working on or the project that you have them or their responsibilities. And so they're waiting for us as leaders to address it. And so again, believe the best. And then lastly, I would just say, be direct. Be direct. And what I mean is, when leaders are uncomfortable, let me say, it's not just leaders. When people are uncomfortable, communication tends to get longer, more words, you become wordy, and sometimes the actual message can be lost in the volume of words. And so one key to difficult conversations would be just be direct. Don't beat around the bush, get to your point, drive home your point, and then work to make sure that you reestablish self-esteem. You help somebody work through any sort of fear of failure. You help them work through their own self-talk, and that we come out of it because I was direct. We address the issue. Now we can begin to think through solutions or change that needs to happen or development that needs to be prioritized. And so be direct. All right. So just really quickly, I'll run down the list again. Don't delay. Be courageous. Be intentional. Be clear. Make it safe. Be perceptive. believe the best, and be direct. So those are all just the keys and tips that I would say can be effective in the moment as you're thinking about engaging in a difficult conversation, as you're thinking about something that you need to address. Those would be the keys that I would just, I don't know, I guess I would encourage you to think through. Maybe you're great at a few of them, but there's one or two that you need to improve on. Whatever that is, I hope that you'll take one of those concepts or ideas and just use it over the next week or so with either kids, spouse, significant other, someone else in your life, or employees and colleagues and teammates within the workplace. By the way, part of the conversation here has been between leader and individual, but these would be the same things I would tell you peer to peer, teammate to teammate, colleague to colleague. And so again, use this list. And again, I told you from the beginning, not exhaustive, not necessarily prioritized, but use these concepts to help in the moment. So now I want to switch to something that I believe is even more important, which is the intentionality of changing the culture and changing my own leadership so that I don't get to a point where I need to have these difficult conversations. I don't think there'll ever be a time where difficult conversations go away, but sometimes difficult conversations are a direct reflection on some things that I have not done as a leader within the culture or environment of an organization. And so I thought, as we were going through this concept and I was just thinking about the conversation and how I could help people, I was thinking, okay, what would I tell people to do on an ongoing basis to change the environment and the culture around difficult conversations? So I've got just a few thoughts. The first one is be confident. You know, it has struck me recently that as I talk to more and more leaders, oftentimes it's my own insecurity and fear that keeps me from having difficult conversations. So how can I, as a leader, grow in my confidence so that my own insecurities, my own fear of failure, my own needs to be liked don't come into conflict with my need to have difficult, honest, critical, crucial conversations? So my own confidence as a leader will in fact impact my willingness to step in and be courageous in conversations. So I want to just say to you as a leader, how can you continue to develop confidence in yourself and in your own leadership, realizing that when you step into leadership, your job is not to be liked by everybody. I would say that the purpose of a leader is to develop people, to grow people, to help people thrive. And so if that's true of my leadership, then I need to be willing to enter into some of these conversations with confidence. And now this goes back to our list previously around in the moment, but ongoing, how do I create a culture and an environment around me where I am dealing with my own insecurities, my fears as a leader? How can I remain confident? The second would just be committed. Be committed. And what I mean by that is be committed to the people that have been placed under your leadership or under your authority. Be committed to their growth. Be committed to their development. Be committed to them individually thriving, because your role as a leader impacts far more than just their work, far more than just their role at work, far more than just the responsibilities within your organization. You have the potential to influence this person in all areas of their life. And so be committed to that individual's growth as a person, because I think that kind of environment will create the ability to have difficult conversations. Now it goes back to being intentional. What's my intent? Well, my intent is to come alongside people, help them become better for whatever role that they play. So be committed. Next, care. Care deeply. I think so much of an environment and a culture where we care about people is to understand, hey, in in the kind of the sphere of this conversation, I'm watching certain activities, I'm seeing certain behaviors. If I really care about a person, I'll take the time to understand, hey, where's this coming from? And sometimes the reason that you need to have a difficult conversation is because you're not aware of what's actually going on in that person's life. There could be things going on at home. There could be things going on emotionally. There could be things going on in their family. There could be additional stresses, anxieties, and pressures. I mean, the pandemic was a great example. As people transitioned, they were dealing with kids out of school, daycares closed. How am I going to manage this? Changing up environments, spouses working from home with kids in the background. How do I manage kids' school days from Zoom and homework and everything else? And so all of those pressures built and mounted. And as a leader, how do I create an environment where I deeply care for the people under my leadership? Next, I would just say, make sure you've created an environment and in your own leadership where you are aligned with values. This is maybe one of the most important things I can say on this topic, because oftentimes my insecurity and fear to enter into a difficult conversation is because I'm perceiving that it is me against another person. And the truth is, it's not me against another person. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the growth of an individual, and it has to do with alignment of values. So the reason that we're having a difficult conversation is most often because there is a behavior that is in conflict with a set of values. They could be my personal values, or they could actually be the values of a company or an organization. If that's the case, the difficult conversation in a culture has nothing to do with me against a person. It has everything to do with aligning an individual with the values of a company or of a team. And so the easiest way to have a difficult conversation is to simply make it about alignment with values, not personal preference. And so again, this goes back to in the moment intentionality. But if I can clearly articulate, listen, we all agreed that these are the values of our team. These are the values of our company. This is what you signed up for from the beginning. This conversation and this culture and this team will remain in alignment with the values. Here's how we operate. Here's how we behave. Here's how we act towards one another. And I am going to hold everyone on this team, including myself, accountable to alignment with those values. Therefore, any conversation that I have from that point forward will be about alignment back to the values, not about personal preference and not about me versus somebody else. So align with values. Next, create clarity. In the culture, in the organization, in the environment around you, create clarity of expectation. Most often, the reason that you're having a difficult conversation is because you haven't been clear about your expectations. Most of the time, and again, I'm using that phrase a lot because there are always kind of exceptions to this. But most of the time, people are not intentionally trying to not meet your expectations. Most people roll out of bed every day and think, gosh, how can I be valued in my work today? How can I meet the expectation of my leaders? How can I do a great job for them? And so oftentimes when you're having a difficult conversation, it's because somebody isn't clear about what you expected. And so in the environment on an ongoing basis, how can you continue to create clarity around roles, around responsibilities, around accountabilities, and around your own expectations or the expectations of the organization? And then my last thought is just be consistent. Be consistent. In the organization, if we're going to align with values, let's make sure that we're consistent in the application of those values. And let's not tolerate certain behaviors that are in conflict with those values. The moment that I, as a leader, tolerate certain behaviors that are in conflict is the moment that that signals to everybody else on the team they're really not that important. So if I can create an environment on an ongoing basis where there's consistency, where we're not tolerating certain behaviors, where I'm having these conversations without delay and we're pretty direct, it will set the expectation that in this culture, in this team, in this environment, here's how we operate, here's how we behave, here are the expectations, here's the clarity, and our leader will be consistent about the application of those expectations. So let me just go through the list again. In the culture, in the environment, in my own leadership, I need to be confident. I need to be committed. I need to care deeply for people. I need to make sure that we remain aligned with our values, create as much clarity as possible, and then be consistent. Be consistent. So I hope, again, that you'll take one of the suggestions or the ideas for having these conversations in the moment. But more than that, I hope that you'll take a few of these ideas on how to create an environment and a culture around you where you can be proactive about maybe reducing the number of difficult conversations, because it should just be pretty consistent. So I hope that this was practical. I hope that this was helpful. I just want to remind you that in these conversations on the Always About People show, we want to cover topics and issues that people are wrestling with, that are practical, that leaders that we're talking to are wrestling through, because our whole goal is to help create cultures where individuals, where people like you and me can thrive. And in this environment where we're coming out of the pandemic and people are calling this the Great Resignation, we've got potential inflationary pressures that are happening, and unemployment has reduced, but yet people are still job switching. Now there's research to show that those who switch jobs are now regretting it. We're living in a culture where I believe there's a leadership vacuum. And so what's really happening is that people are looking for environments where they can become the best versions of themselves, and they're going to vote with their loyalty. And so again, on this show, we hope to cover topics that help you to create an environment and a culture where people can thrive, both yourself and the people around you. So for those of you who watch this show consistently, thank you for partnering with us. We hope that this is practical and insightful for you. If you have any ideas on topics that we should cover or guests that we should interview, we'd love to have your suggestions. Please leave comments, ask questions. We'll get back to you as best we can and as quickly as we can. But thank you for joining us for another episode of the Always About People show. We'll see you next time.